Made with the support of NZ On Air.
Quick heads up, this episode of Quarantine Nation also contains a little bit of swearing.
I think we've been in lockdown for quite a while. Although it may have been 5 minutes, my memory is terrible. You okay?
I'm great.
Yeah, good.
No, this is me anxiously just thinking, did I press the record button? Yeah, I did.
Yeah, check it, man.
It's got to be... I did.
Good.
I did.
I heard that.
This is...
Mike Minogue. I live in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. I am a radio host, an actor, a producer, a writer, talent agency owner, a speaking bureau owner, and a podcast company owner.
Mike, man of many hats, had a pretty good first lockdown. He was one of the lucky ones whose job actually got him out of the house. He was living on Waiheke Island with his wife and their baby daughter, but was an essential worker in the CBD.
It would take me 2 hours to get from my home in Onotangi into Auckland City, so we'd ferry in, there might be 4 or 5 other people, probably health workers, and we'd get into the city, and then I'd skateboard up to Graham Street. The city was just completely abandoned. There's just no people there whatsoever. I loved that. And then when I'd skateboard back, you'd go through a parking building about 4 or 5 stories high, going down and down and down with no fear of being run over. Straight out of the door and onto the road, onto, 4-lane highway with no fear of it. And so that was pretty good. My wife was not enjoying the fact that she had to stay home with a practical newborn around that time. It's like, well, I'm an essential worker. Sure, I could stay home with you and help, but, the country needs me.
Iron Maiden's not going to play itself.
Thanks. If only we played Iron Maiden.
So, yeah, Mike Minogue's essential work during lockdown is to skateboard into a studio in the city and do a show on Radio Hauraki. But then he gets a call asking if he'll do something that's arguably slightly more essential. Now, Minogue has just come off a couple of years of starring alongside Karen O'Leary in the mockumentary Wellington Paranormal.
In order to deal with these cases, I have assembled Officers Minogue and O'Leary.
Minogue, I'm just requesting assistance here.
Thought on a fence again, O'Leary?
Yep.
So Wellington Paranormal was a TV show that was spun off from What We Do in the Shadows, which was a vampire mockumentary made by Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. Karen O'Leary and myself were in that film as Officers Minogue and O'Leary.
The pair had used their real names during the script run-through, and it stuck. So, early in lockdown, perhaps while skateboarding in a multi-storey car park, Mike Minogue receives a call.
Paul Yates, a producer for Wellington Paranormal, called me up and said this idea had come about, and it was the government wanted to be able to convey information to the New Zealand public without it coming from the police.
The plan was that Minogue and O'Leary, in character as comedy TV cops Minogue and O'Leary, would deliver messages about lockdown rules and public health advice in a way that would be less alienating than a real cop or official.
Because when you get told what to do by the police, there's sort of reaction from a certain portion of the population.
It makes sense. After all, this was a time when real policing had become very strange. I remember really early on watching a cop car cruising my local beach, watching out for anyone who might be breaking the law by, swimming or paddleboarding. And this is a time when the new Chief of Police, Andrew Costa, is being asked for his response to the fact that a Cabinet Minister had ridden a bike.
I spoke to him a short time ago and asked if the Health Minister, David Clark, driving to do a mountain bike ride was a good look, given everyone else has been told to exercise close to home.
From what I have seen, Minister Clark has apologised.
So, in these very weird times...
Kia ora Aotearoa and welcome to the Wellington Paranormal COVID-19 Crisis Communication Command Centre /T-Room. Now that the COVID-19 alert status has moved to level 4, everyone should be at home isolating.
O'Leary.
Minogue, what are you doing? You're supposed to be here helping with this?
I'm home isolating. The problem is, I think my home is haunted.
Why not have police messaging delivered by a couple of fictional ghost hunters?
Anyway, home isolation is now compulsory and vital in stopping the spread of COVID-19. So blimmin' stay home. And if you do need to make contact with others when out...
It was a little bit odd. They got permission to film down in Wellington, and then I'd be on Zoom in my sunroom on Waiheke Island. So I'd just be wearing my hat and my police uniform to my waist, and then they sort of had right in the fact that I was stuck at home, ostensibly in Wellington.
What up? Officer Minogue here.
We've had reports that some of you younger dudes have been sneaking out of your house at night so you can catch up with your mates. Probably the main one, the one that did really well, was Karen wrote a song. 2 metres, please.
2 metres, please.
2 metres, please. There was more to it than that.
COVID if you start to sneeze.
But those are the words that I can remember. And that really caught on.
I don't want to breathe your COVID if you start to wheeze.
Minogue and O'Leary kept making those advisory videos as the lockdown rolled on, through those strange, intense weeks where we all watched the case numbers rise, then peak, then start to come down. And eventually, the alert levels start coming down too. We ended episode 4 with a spooky Anzac Day last post from an empty Eden Park. So that's April 25. A few days later,
from Tuesday morning, the 28th of April, we will move to level 3 and stay there for 2 weeks.
Level 3 is exciting mostly because while there are still very strict rules, we can buy takeaways once more.
Looking forward next week to accessing takeaway food.
They've got the green light to switch the golden arches back on.
Opening day at McDonald's, and we're all here for breakfast.
Like many people today, I have enjoyed a takeaway coffee. However,
at this point in our lives, there is always a however, right?
However, it is important not to congregate outside.
Then, 2 weeks later, mid-May,
Cabinet agrees we are ready to move into level 2.
And level 2 is relatively chill. We're allowed back into shops, offices, public transport, schools, restaurants, and also to roam around the country, albeit with serious restrictions around sizes of gatherings. The hard lockdown is basically over.
But the best is yet to come. In early June,
we moved down to COVID-19 alert level 1 from midnight tonight.
New Zealand has, incredibly, beaten the virus. For now.
The year is 2020 and a deadly pandemic is raging all across the globe. We are locked inside, we are terrified, we are baking sourdough. We've been living on Zoom in our living room since the lockdown was declared. Societies are bended, our commitments are suspended, it's all unprecedented and nobody's prepared for a quarantine nation. We beat the virus, we are heroes. It's a quarantine nation. New Zealand 1, COVID 0. In the quarantine nation, we can have McDonald's, we can cut our hair. In the quarantine nation, national cooperation to pursue elimination. Save the quarantine nation, oh yeah.
I'm Adam Dudding.
And I'm Eugene Bingham. And like Jack sings it so well, this is indeed Quarantine Nation, an 8-part, mostly serious history of New Zealand's pandemic years, produced for Stuff by Te Pūrongo Productions. Episode 5, An Open and Shut Case.
And so today, I can announce
June the 8th, 2020. Level 1. After 75 days of lockdown or other constraints, this is a pretty huge moment.
we moved down to COVID-19 alert level 1 from midnight tonight.
With no new cases of community transmission found for at least a month, the government is saying there's basically no COVID virus out there for us to catch, which means there's no need for masks, social distancing, limits on gatherings, any of that stuff.
it was a very emotional moment, that last briefing in that first lockdown.
Sean Hendy. Remember, he's one of the scientists constantly updating mathematical models to help the government assess the risk involved in moving between levels or in modifying restrictions.
We'd finished the cabinet paper, me and my team, and we'd sent it in, and then I turned off my phone and shut down my computer and said, I'm really going to take a break. We've been working for, 8-9 weeks at this point, solidly through weekends, 12, 14-hour days, so I was exhausted. We'd booked an Airbnb out on Waihi Island, tried to relax, but then turned on that briefing. Like, for once, I wasn't watching with a pen in hand to try and jot down the numbers. I was just sitting there watching it as an ordinary New Zealander. And that was a very emotional moment for me as Jacinda talked through the fact that we were going to go back to alert level 1. You know, a wave of emotion hit me, and I cried quietly to myself, sitting on that couch with a glorious view of the Hauraki Gulf.
Science communicator Susie Wiles, who has been doing literally hundreds of interviews unpacking the science of lockdowns, shifts her attention to other things that need explaining.
It was trying to get people to understand why our borders were still shut, the fact that that could leak. So we did lots of stuff then around contact tracing and trying to get people to go and get tested if they were sick.
Also, by this time, the vaccines that have been in development from the moment a Chinese scientist first uploaded the genomic data for SARS-CoV-2 in early January, those vaccines are almost ready for early testing.
At that stage, vaccine trials were starting.
So Susie is getting her head around the vaccines and starting to talk about them in a bit more detail.
What were the different kinds of vaccines and what was being trialled and what was potentially coming.
And like everyone else, Susie is just loving the return of at least some of the freedoms New Zealanders have recently sacrificed.
My daughter was in a band and they were doing Rock Quest, and I just remember feeling so privileged that we were in Auckland Girls Grammar in their big auditorium with all of these kids, these teenagers playing their hearts out, none of us masked, none of us unwell, and going, man, all around the world, people are not able to do any of this safely, and here we are. And so I know the pandemic has been really hard. I know it's impacted our children, but relatively speaking,
the situation in New Zealand just feels unreal. At this point, the death toll in Aotearoa in total is 22, and that figure hasn't changed in almost 3 weeks. This, at a time when the US has just reached 120,000 deaths. The UK has hit 55,000. Sweden has 5,250. And our successive weeks of 0 new cases feels like a different planet from the 100,000 new cases being reported worldwide every single day. At that moment, we are part of a very small club, which includes Taiwan, Singapore, Iceland, Vietnam, of countries that have had an incursion of COVID, but have managed with some combination of efficient contact tracing, surveillance, or strict lockdowns to shut down the virus to the point where society is able to return to some kind of normal.
And given how spectacularly expensive it is for a government to pay people not to go to work, it's a huge relief to see the economy sputter back into life. We're buying and selling things. We're back doing all those jobs that have been, for a wee while, labelled non-essential. Sports roar back into life. Huge crowds gather for local games. Quite the contrast to countries abroad where if a game is played at all, it's being transmitted to viewers from a totally empty stadium. On our daily coronavirus podcast, Associated Press reporter Nick Perry tells us how his international readers are obsessed with stories from New Zealand at this time.
AP flew me down to Dunedin so I could cover the game between the Highlanders and the Chiefs, because here was, 20,000 people turning up to a stadium with no masks, no social distancing, and just carrying on life as normal. And that seemed very odd to most people around the world.
International tourism is still totally munted, both inbound and outbound. But instead, Kiwis are roaming their own country and kidding themselves that the croissants are just as good here as in Paris.
Local soap, Shortland Street, which dialed back production because it was so awkward shooting TV under social distancing rules, dials it back up again. And speaking of TV, there are mixed feelings about the winding up of something that has become part of our day-to-day.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to today's stand-up and the first day of Alert Level 1.
The 1pm press conference.
This is the end of the road for the 1pm stand-up where you sort of held national attention and it's been appointment viewing. Is there anything you want to say to sort of mark the end of the 1pm stand-ups?
Well, the first thing I would say is I hope this is the last 1pm stand-up, not because I haven't enjoyed them, but because there is still a long way to go on this journey. And
that's the thing. This is supposedly the end of the daily press grillings, but Ashley Bloomfield isn't ready to be counting his chickens. In fact, he says looking back now, this honeymoon period, the level 1 phase that began on June the 8th, was one of the most stressful bits of the entire pandemic.
Alert Level 1 was in some ways the hardest because, and I know that the Prime Minister was the same in this regard, everyone was enjoying life. We had this privilege, yes, our borders were closed, but essentially we could get on with our lives as normal.
And every minute of every hour of every day, I was waiting for the text or the phone call to say there was a case.
Life still isn't really normal. The border is closed, which creates its own huge problems, but there is still a trickle of people arriving and coming through quarantine, which means there is forever the risk of the virus sneaking back in. To offset that risk, everyone is encouraged to use a new smartphone tracker app. You can even scan special QR codes to help you build a personal digital diary of your movements. To be fair, not everyone likes and not everyone uses the app, but the idea is sound. It is designed to make it easier and faster for contact tracers to join the dots between infections if, or rather when, the virus does slip through. And sure enough...
Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome back to the Ministry of Health.
There's a big scare just a week into level 1.
Thanks for making yourselves available at fairly short notice so I can brief you on the 2 cases that we are reporting today in New Zealand. So as you heard from our 1 o'clock release, we have had 2 cases. These are 2 women from the same family, one in her 30s.
Quick spoiler, this all comes to nothing in the end. But basically these women had been in quarantine, MIQ, tested negative for COVID, and were allowed to leave earlier than usual for compassionate reasons and drove themselves to Wellington. But once there, they tested positive, which means that the virus was, basically, out in the wild during the drive. The whole affair gave everyone the heebie-jeebies. Policies for compassionate exemptions changed.
There was, of course, a flurry of news coverage about this outbreak that didn't quite happen. And one of the people whose opinion was sought was
Hone Harawira, Māori activist. I'm descended from the many iwi of Taitokero, so I list myself as Ngāpuhi Nui Tonu.
And what the journalist from Māori television is asking Hone Harawira is whether he's going to bring back his Te Taitokoro checkpoints because of the news about these 2 women who've tested positive. So it seems a good time to take a moment to explain what those checkpoints, which had sprung up around the country just as we entered lockdown in late March, had been about. And to understand that, we need to go even further back in time, like a century, to the flu pandemic of 1918, the outbreak whose centenary Michael Baker talked about back in episode 1.
It swept through the country in 6 to 8 weeks, and it killed almost 1% of people. That's 9,000 people. And it was particularly devastating for Māori communities. It orphaned a lot of children. And I think people were absolutely numb.
At a time when the Māori population was just 50,000, around 2,500 Māori died of the flu. That's 1 in 20. While the rate for non-Māori was closer to 1 in every 130. Hone Harawira says those Māori communities have held on to the memory of that catastrophe.
We knew that stuff in the back of our minds, that what's that part of? That's where everybody was buried from back when they got the disease, and we had no medicine for it, or if they did, they never gave it to us. And I'd known that around different Māori communities, they had that same sort of thing. And in our one, they tell the story of the one person who was responsible for burying people in and around Whakapara. He was the only one allowed into the graveyard to bury them, and he used to drink all the time, pretty much drunk himself to death, just having to deal with it, and just knowing that that's what happened to our people.
Thinking about how much whakapapa was lost and the pain and grief that it still causes our people today, that's why we will always react to a threat that we can't see, touch, smell or feel the way we do, is because we've learnt it wiped out most of our population.
This is Nai's Manual.
Kia ora, ko Nai's Manual taku ingoa, he uri ahau no whangaroa.
Nai's was part of Te Taitokoro's checkpoints alongside Hone Harawira from early on.
As the COVID thing came, there's lots of talks about border controls and this, but very, very little about Māori communities and the impact that it had on us in the past. And you could tell by the way the discussions and all of the developments and the funding was going that we weren't part of the current plan either. But we had to do something to try to protect our old people in particular, because they suffer all of those, I think they call them comorbidities, diabetes, lung disease, heart disease, all of those sorts of things that made them particularly susceptible to something like COVID coming in. We had something coming into our country that we didn't understand, but we knew that if we didn't try to protect our communities from it, our communities could go the same way our tupuna had gone, which is straight to the graveyard.
So, as a veteran organiser, as someone who knew how to mobilise people, Hone set to work. He was talking to others around the country who felt Māori communities might be getting overlooked.
Rawiri Waititi down on the East Cape and Debbie Packer down in Taranaki.
They threw some ideas around and settled on
trying to do something on the roads.
Hone made some calls.
I rang a whole lot of the brothers.
Gave the cops a bit of warning of what he had in mind.
So I rang the local police commander.
And started making plans, which is about when Nais got involved.
I got a phone call from my tuakana. Said, we need a representative from Whangaroa. We are having a hui over in Kaikohe. Be there at this time and let's start talking about what it looks like for us up here in the north.
I didn't ask any of the iwi, and I didn't ask any of the health authorities. I didn't want anybody to say, well, hang on, can you wait? Or no, you shouldn't. Or have you thought of this?
I just jumped in my car and went over to Kaikohe and joined the meeting that was held over there with multiple people from around Taitoketo.
What did it consist of at the outset? Like how many cars, how many road cones, how many high-vis jackets?
Whoever turned up,
Yep.
Honestly. We had no rules on it. I rang down to a couple of the guys in Kaikohe. This block is going to come down your fella's way. I'm not sure where exactly, but Whangarei North, what are we going to do? And Jay said, we're going to Whakapara. We'll do it at Whakapara.
Nais has a background in logistics, so she knows how to get things organised. And in a matter of days, the checkpoints existed, after a fashion.
The first checkpoint I was involved in was more like a tester. Hat on, a high-vis on, and handing out pamphlets, and making people aware.
Saying, we've got COVID coming into the country. We're going to try and stop it from coming into the Taitoketo. So we're just wanting to let you know what the issues are and let you get on your way.
Once there was a nationwide lockdown in place, Te Taitokoro Border Control pondered whether there was still any need to be controlling the flow of traffic to the north and concluded, yeah, there was. And in time, they got pretty slick.
We're in full PPE gear, the white overalls, coverings, gloves, a mask on, goggles on. People would normally wind their window down a little bit and go, oh, what are you doing? Our response was, kia ora. Where have you come from and where are you going? Oh, I'm going to my batch. I just come from Auckland. From that point, we're like, you're not coming up here, turn around and go home. You're not listen to the rules that have been set with these lockdowns.
Nais says police became pretty comfortable with what the checkpoints were doing and provided support. They'd help with the traffic management. And if a batch visitor from Auckland wanted to argue the toss with someone at the checkpoint...
When they started arcing up, a hand would go up, the police would come over, the police would do their spiel to them, which was totally left up to the police. They'd look at us and we'll give them a signal of turn around. They're not coming up here because they're from here, they're coming up here for a holiday whilst they're in lockdown.
In June, with the virus eliminated and the country at level 1, the checkpoints did stand down. But from that point on, Hone and Nais and others were still watching very carefully. They needed to be ready to spring back into action if the virus ever got loose again. That scare of June 16, with the women who drove to Wellington with COVID in their car, turns out to be a false alarm. But, spoiler alert, there will definitely come a time when the high-vis and the road cones will be back on the roads at Te Taitokoro.
Far from the Northland roadblocks, there's also a real awareness in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, that a one-size-fits-all response to COVID isn't necessarily working for Māori.
I think the mainstream approach wasn't really a Māori response.
This is Dr. Kimiora Raireno. Kimiora, who's of Ngāti and Te Arawa descent, is a senior research fellow at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa.
So the government approach was sort of individualistic. What can we do for you? But we don't operate like that. There's a real way that Māori operate. If we look at looking ourselves as a wider whānau, and if there's something wrong, it's not just the individual that needs the care, it's the whānau.
A great example of this came later in the pandemic, when vaccines were rolled out on an age basis, older and thus more vulnerable people first.
However, when you've got intergenerational homes, that approach won't work. You have a kaumātua being cared by rangatahi, so therefore you have a vaccinated and an unvaccinated. How does that work? It doesn't. So we had marae that decided that it would be better just to open the doors to everybody. You come in as whānau, kaumātua Pākeke rangatahi, get vaccinated together. So a little bit against the grain, but it made sense for Māori.
Kimi Ora was so struck by the ways that the marae of Tāmaki Makaurau responded to the pandemic that she later published a book about it, Toi Tū Ngā Marae. One of the people she interviewed was Lavinia McGee-Repia, who's the hiamana of the Ruapōtaka Marae in Glen Innes.
Been there for a few years now, but love working with my community.
Lavinia says when the first lockdown kicked off, the marae's CEO, Georgie Thompson, pulls out a pile of phones.
Our tumu whakarai, Georgie, said, I've got these phones. I think it was about 8 of them.
Georgie hands the phones out and announces that the marae is now running a community outreach phone tree.
We were voluntold. All it was receiving the calls, taking names, where did they live, what did they need. And then we went on to doing the food parcels.
At first, the food parcels are pretty basic.
I can recall them being just in a brown bag. So we ended up delivering to our kaumātua flats. We created bubbles amongst ourselves. My mokopuna came with me and we went out and delivered parcels, knocked on the doors, moved away and just let them know this is from Ruapōtaka Marae. So people didn't ask, we just took it out there to our kaumātua.
Kimi Ora Raireno says that kind of community response had a huge impact on the way Māori weathered the pandemic.
I feel like there hasn't been enough talk about the mahi that marae did, but marae were phenomenal during this time. The work that they did, the people that gave them their time, the cooks that would come into the kitchen by themselves to make sure that kaumātua were fed, whānau were fed, following all those rigorous protocols that they had. There were a lot of things about COVID that didn't suit us as Māori, but we had to sort of change our thinking for the well-being of the people, and that's what we did.
We moved down to COVID-19
We're in full PPE gear.
Karen wrote a song.
We weren't part of the current plan.
You're not coming up here, turn around and go home.
There is still a long way to go on this journey.
Despite Ashley Bloomfield's anxiety, despite our collective freakouts each time there's a wobble from MIQ, New Zealand's time in Level 1 somehow keeps stretching on. We make it through June. We make it through July. Is it too crass to admit that for a minute there, the New Zealand corner of the global pandemic becomes almost boring? On our Coronavirus NZ podcast, we're dialing down the frequency from daily.
I'm Adam Dudding.
And I'm Eugene Bingham. Each day we bring you the headlines.
To bi-weekly.
Twice a week. On Tuesdays and Thursdays we'll bring you up to speed with matters.
To weekly.
Once a week we bring you the news.
And eventually bailing entirely, pivoting to become a podcast about the forthcoming election.
Tick, tick. Stuff 2020. Election. Podcast.
Because amid all this, there's an election coming in September. But even that is looking a bit boring because the opposition National Party has been struggling to get noticed while the nation hangs on every last announcement from the Prime Minister. Plus, the Labour Party and Jacinda Ardern have earned so much love for the pandemic response to date that the good money is on a Labour landslide. Ardern's Chief Science Advisor, Juliet Gerard, remembers this as a time of mixed feelings.
In some ways, it felt like a sort of honeymoon. You'd got this window when everyone was normal. We were sitting in the pub. And in other ways, there were dark clouds on the horizon because you knew the virus was going to get in eventually, and you needed to do that in a controlled way. And that was always going to be hard. And at that stage, there was no guarantee the vaccine would arrive.
Yeah, vaccines. It's all very well to have eliminated the virus, but at some point we'd have to reconnect to a world that absolutely hadn't eliminated it. And for that to happen safely, but at any kind of sensible pace, we'd need a vaccine. But as Sean Hendy points out,
That was one of the big uncertainties very early on, is when is the vaccine going to arrive and how effective will that vaccine be?
By now, development is going at literally warp speed, because that's the name of the project that the US has launched, throwing vast sums at a range of vaccine development projects. Operation Warp Speed means the path to large-scale production is way faster than usual. Time is saved by running some of the phases of lab, animal and human trials in parallel, and the US government takes on a lot of the financial risk of scaling up to make millions of doses of vaccine before it's clear which ones are actually going to prove safe and effective. It's a kind of brilliant and ultimately life-saving approach, but as we'll see later, it's something that some people will misconstrue, with pretty serious consequences.
Overseas, a few other things are happening as we head towards our spring and summer of stadium footy and music festivals. Some scientists are trying to figure out where the hell the virus has actually come from. The main theory was always that, like a bunch of other coronaviruses, SARS-CoV-2 had started off in an animal population, mutated just enough to be caught by a human, a spillover event, and then once in humans, it had kept on mutating till it became a successful spreader between humans. Hey presto, pandemic. But there are some other theories bouncing around. Fact is, there had been a bio-research lab in Wuhan not all that far from the infamous wet market. And at this Wuhan Institute of Virology, they did study bat coronaviruses. And lethal lab leaks have happened in the past. So, perhaps this was all caused by an accident rather than a purely natural spillover process. There isn't any clear evidence for this theory, but the Chinese government was so unhelpful when foreign researchers asked for information about what had happened early on that some quite respectable scientists argue it isn't totally implausible. And there are other theories that are even more out there.
There were claims, of course, they had deliberately released the virus.
This is Foreign Affairs academic Robert Patman, who we met briefly in episode 4.
There's no evidence to support that, but there are those claims.
Also, and we'll get into this a bit more when we dig into conspiracy theories in episode 6, there are the absolute plonkers who try to tell us COVID is actually being spread by 5G cell phone towers, but nah, that's definitely not a thing. And according to Susie Wiles, explainer extraordinaire, even the Wuhan lab leak theory really doesn't stand up to close scrutiny.
The evidence is really clear that this has come from a natural environment. This is a spillover event that then made it to the wet market, which was an amplification event, which then spread it further.
Spillovers aren't even that uncommon.
It's happening on a daily basis. Most of them just fizzle out and go nowhere, and then you have these ones that become a pandemic.
Okay. You going? Yep, I'm just following. All
right. We're going through to the physical containment level 2 laboratories. I'm just trying to find a code that fits. I should say, I'll check your shoes. Shoes are good. They're enclosed.
As per our instructions.
Don't apply makeup.
At this time, there are also some really cool scientific investigations going on in New Zealand. With no virus on the loose, the country's become a unique sort of laboratory.
That is a typical PC2 laboratory.
This is Dr. Joanne Hewitt, who leads a virology lab at PHF Science, what used to be called ESR, in Pōneke, Wellington. And her area of great expertise is, well, to put it simply,
basically viruses that are shed in poo.
And it's really important work. She and her team go looking for
all those viruses that are shed in feces that can end up in food that we eat or the rivers that we swim in and all the health problems associated with that.
They test food and environmental samples and wastewater, which is a polite word for what gets flushed into our sewage systems. They're looking out for all sorts of nasties.
Norovirus, adenoviruses, enteroviruses including poliovirus.
But then COVID comes along, a respiratory virus. So Joanne Hewitt and her team,
we started to think about how we would apply the methods that we knew worked for other viruses to COVID.
And that's really fiddly. It isn't entirely clear if coronaviruses will even show up in wastewater, so Joanne and her team start looking into it, which means during early lockdown, at a time when the rest of the country is doing its darndest to avoid the SARS-CoV-2 virus, Joanne is desperately trying to get her hands on some. The lockdown is working just a bit too well.
The big problem we had was that there weren't many samples available that were from areas where there was a lot of cases. We were sort of chasing an outbreak that was very quick to be contained. So there was weddings and outbreak in a pub, sometimes in very small places where we didn't have a sample available.
But finally, they have enough decent samples that they can develop a test to detect fragments of dead COVID virus in wastewater.
We worked out that we would need 10 cases per 100,000 people to confidently detect it with an 87% chance of detection.
So when we go into level 1, borders closed but everything else wide open, New Zealand is in a position to do some science that's impossible almost anywhere else. Joanne's team can test wastewater from all over the country. If no virus shows up, that region is clear. But if virus does show up, bam, that information is instantly fed back to the decision makers in Wellington, who can then start looking for these people who have had virus in their poo and also make decisions about what to do next.
And the precision is astounding. We're jumping ahead in our timeline a little here, but there'll come a time when Auckland is in a lockdown, but the rest of the country isn't. And wastewater surveillance will become super important for seeing whether the virus has spread beyond Auckland. During that time, there's a truck driver who tests positive while passing through Palmerston North and goes to hospital for treatment. He never passes the bug on to anyone, but for those days that he's in the city recovering from the virus, Joanne says the wastewater testing from Palmerston North goes from clear to detecting the virus and then back to clear again, as this single patient recovers, stops using the local sewage system and leaves town. One person crook in an entire city, and Joanne can see it.
One person in 90,000.
Gemma Geoghegan, the Otago virologist, says a bunch of fascinating genomics research was also made possible by New Zealand's unusually low caseload. COVID-19 was the first pandemic in human history where the full genomes of individual viruses were being sequenced in real time in their millions.
I mean, before COVID, we did lots of genomics of viral outbreaks, but it was always retrospective. But during COVID-19, it was the first time that it could be done so rapidly that it could actually be informing our understanding of the virus outbreak in real time.
And in New Zealand, additional data from contact tracers and health officials who are tracking our relatively small clusters means that understanding is astonishingly fine-grained.
So we were sequencing every case and could do this fine-scale investigation. I've been working in this field for like 10 years of trying to understand virus emergence and evolution and how viruses adapt when they jump from an animal host into a human and spread through populations and how this happens. And then a pandemic happened and we can study this as it's happening. It's kind of amazing.
There were claims, of course, they had deliberately released the virus.
Remember the vaccine going through?
The evidence is really clear that this is coming. There were dark clouds on the horizon.
Viruses that are shared.
So as the second half of 2020 gets underway, New Zealand is in a curious kind of bubble. A population that can live almost normal lives, an almost complete absence of death and mayhem, a pretty popular PM, and an economy that, despite the huge negatives of a closed border, is kind of getting moving again. Projects interrupted by the virus are getting back on their feet. Literally, in the case of Rebecca Rowland. Remember, she's the bucket list American from episode 2 who cut short her Te Araroa trek. With the country open again, she decides to finish the job.
No, you walked that last 86 Ks in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costumes, is that right?
Yeah, so because it had taken us over 6 months to walk it, we thought it was funny because we were so slow in the end. So we dressed up as turtles and then we ended up doing a charity.
Yeah, and they turned that belated final push into a charitable endeavour, raising funds on Give a Little for Women's Refuge. But it has to be said, not everyone on the planet is sharing in the general Antipodean joy.
It was rhetorically important to people in other countries that we be seen to be suffering for what we had achieved.
This is David Hood again. In his day job, he's an IT trainer at Otago University in Dunedin, but he's also something of a freelance data analyst who basically figures out things that interest him, then posts them online. Well before COVID, he was especially interested in the quirks of social media, like the time he investigated a pile of accounts that were posting extreme views and claiming to be from New Zealand, but he noticed that the people doing the posting were working very odd hours, and actually this was almost certainly a foreign disinformation campaign.
They were Russian accounts that I saw supporting far-right fringe New Zealanders, and when you went into the time zone analysis, they were pretty clearly in somewhere near Moscow kind of thing.
Anyway, so David's a bit of an expert on fake accounts and disinformation. But he also keeps an eye on the things that real people say. And once New Zealand has eliminated the virus and has left lockdown, he observes the rise of a certain kind of social media account, often based in the US or UK, that seems to be taking issue with New Zealand's approach.
At the time, the New Zealand government was an international symbol of liberal democracy and being able to handle things well in a democratic basis.
And frankly, mid-2020 is the moment when there's a clear divide starting to show between those countries whose leaders initially talked down or ignored the pandemic, the UK, the US, Brazil, say, and those countries which have acted more swiftly and more cautiously, which of course includes New Zealand. New Zealand's evident success at shutting down the virus seems to really irritate some people. And so, to be blunt, they start talking shit about what's happening down in the South Pacific.
Essentially selective bagging of New Zealand for fictional reasons in order that New Zealand cannot have succeeded, treating New Zealand as a symbol for what is bad in the world.
According to some, New Zealand, land of mask-free sports stadiums, is in fact a gulag. Rather than a place which is gearing up for a summer of music festivals, it is a prison state. But then, on the evening of August the 11th, 2020,
after 102 days, we have our first cases of COVID-19 outside of a managed isolation or quarantine facility in New Zealand.
Bam! Auckland slams right back into level 3, basically lockdown, and the rest of the country is back to level 2. Not exactly lockdown, but still lots of restrictions. In the end, Auckland moves back down the levels pretty quickly, and the rest of the country even faster. By early October, it's level 1 all over, once again. But it's still been really unsettling. Everyone's plans are up in the air again. The election gets delayed. We all discover that lockdowns are much less fun second time around. We now know the virus is a sneaky bastard and will slip in if we're not careful. In a way, it's a bit of a wake-up call, a reminder not to be complacent, not to be smug. But it's also a gift to those people overseas David Hood was talking about, people who evidently didn't enjoy seeing New Zealand as
an international symbol of being able to handle things well.
New Zealand, it's over. It's over for New Zealand. Everything's gone. They're beautiful.
This guy needs no introduction, of course. And look, this podcast is mostly focusing on what the pandemic meant for New Zealanders. So we've spent very little time talking about the American who said, as the virus arrived,
we have it under control, it's going to be just fine.
The guy who, during press briefings watched by millions, speculated about remedies that doctors had already tried, done trials on and rejected, such as hydroxychloroquine.
I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot.
The guy who used his position of great influence to suggest imaginative ways to kill the virus.
So, supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that has him in check, but you're going to test it.
Oh, or maybe this.
And then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning, because you see it gets on the lungs and it...
So, that guy. You know who it is. But anyway, we're going to play you just a little bit from a speech of August the 18th, a few days after New Zealand's quick return to lockdown because of those cases that have slipped through after 102 days in the clear. This is at a point, remember, when New Zealand has recorded 22 deaths and the US 170,000. So, well, just have a listen.
The places that they were using to hold up, they're having a big surge. They were holding up names of countries, and now they're saying, whoops. In fact, even New Zealand, you see what's going on in New Zealand. They beat it. It was like front page, they beat it because they wanted to show me something. The problem is, big surge in New Zealand, so, it's...
Anyway, Trump isn't the only one taking personal satisfaction in New Zealand's discomfort. A few days later, one particular tweet gets under the collective skin of quite a lot of Kiwis. During an online argument with some New Zealand Twitter users, an account called No Lockdown explains our situation to us.
You can't leave, and you can't easily have people in, and you're back in lockdown in major parts of the country, and the quarantine camps are public knowledge. Your country is a hellhole.
I mean, to be fair, the first bit's almost entirely accurate, apart from the slightly loaded description of MIQ as quarantine camps when many quarantinees are hanging out in luxury hotel rooms. But that final word, hellhole, causes an outbreak of, well, more hilarity than outrage, really. Hundreds of New Zealanders take to Twitter to agree with Mr. No Lockdown posting #NZHellhole and a range of snarky captions alongside pictures of rolling hills, clear skies, frolicking wildlife and ocean views.
Please send help. Struggling hard being in this #NZHellhole.
Writes at Lucy Chubby alongside 2 photos of breathtaking alpine scenery.
All Kiwis are handcuffed 24/7, so local fauna have been press-ganged into performing everyday tasks.
Writes at Squeaky From, alongside a very cute picture of a Kia tugging a tramper's bootlace. At Rolo Mufino posts a picture of someone snoozing on a hammock with a caption that reads, in part,
"Terrible day. Barbecue, beach, drinks, fishing, lovely walk. It's hell here in New Zealand."
It's all pretty silly. But sometimes having a laugh seems the only way to deal with a world that's feeling more and more out of kilter. And it isn't just strangers far away who are disappearing down the rabbit holes of misinformation and conspiracy theories. As the months drag on, it's becoming clear that even in Aotearoa, there is something truly strange happening to our collective understanding of reality.
The Pfizer mRNA vaccine is an extremely safe vaccine. No vaccine is 100% effective or 100% safe.
So far, Sweden has fewer cases of coronavirus and fewer deaths than the state of Michigan does.
In New Zealand, I can tell you that a large number of Italian troops are present. There are going to be explosions, shooting, and children screaming.
That's next time on Quarantine Nation.
The year is 2020 and a deadly pandemic is...
That was episode 5 of Quarantine Nation, an 8-part series produced for Stuff by Te Pūrongo Productions. For more about Quarantine Nation, as well as links to feature articles and extended videos of some of our key interviews, go to www.stuff.co.nz/QN. The series was researched, written, hosted and produced by Adam Dudding and Eugene Bingham of Te Pūrongo Productions, with additional research by Connor Scott. Ngā mihi ki a whakaata Māori for the use of the Hone Harawira clip from Te Ao Māori News. Thanks also to RNZ for use of news clips and to Stuff for its compendious Coronavirus NZ archive, as well as Fox News. Editing by Toby Longbottom, mixing by Andrew McDowell of Digicate, graphics by Phil Johnson, photography by Abigail Doughty, Chris Skelton and David Unwin. Social media and video editing by Via Digital. At Stuff, thanks to executive producer Chris Reed, content producer Dave Hull and senior legal counsel Charlotte Curry.
Quarantine Nation!
Made with the support of NZ On Air.